What's up, you guys, and welcome back to my channel. First of all, I apologize for my off-putting, nasally sounding voice. I've been incredibly ill this past week, but I quickly wanted to thank you for the millionth time for being so awesome and supportive with my audio. You guys gave me a ton of great feedback last week. You said that you're enjoying this microphone, that the little tweaks that I made a world of a difference, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being honest with me and telling me the problems that you were seeing. It helps me a lot. At the end of the day, I just want to improve my channel, and I want to improve your viewing experience, and I want to improve the ease of my filming and, entire amount of work from start to finish. So when you guys offer up great tips and advice and suggestions, I really, really appreciate them because it ends up benefiting us all. Today's case is one that I've actually debated back and forth on covering, and not because there's anything in it that makes me feel uncomfortable, or that's usually my typical reason for not covering a case, but it's one of those, and I know you guys will know what I'm talking about, where there's not a lot of information on the case and there's nothing in it that necessarily screams something crazy is going on. There's no insane event, but it's just one that makes you feel odd. It makes you feel like you can't shake it, and it's one that I keep going back to over and over again, and I'm interested to see if any of you guys feel the same way about this case. But that was why I was kind of hesitant to post a video about it, because there's not a lot of information. There's probably only 3 articles that are left out there, a whole bunch of Reddit threads, and I think a 5 or 6 minute video. But I just can't shake this case. I've probably gone back to it and planned to film it 6 other times and then backed out because I feel like everyone will think I'm looking too deeply into things. But at the end of the day, I felt like we all look at things from a different perspective, and maybe you guys could offer up some information. Maybe you could possibly learn something from this case. And also, it kind of touches on a topic that is uncomfortable for me to talk about, and that is the idea that maybe someone won't ever be found. And normally we try to be very, very positive, and we try to, look towards all the, great possibilities of how someone might be found. But in this case, there's such this looming, high possibility that just won't happen, and it freaks me out, and it freaks a lot of people out, I'm sure. So before I ramble too much about this, I guess I'll just go ahead and get started on the case. So today we are talking about 25-year-old Danny Pickett, and he was last seen on October 24th, 2006 in St. John's, Newfoundland. Danny was one of, I think, 10 siblings total, so he grew up in a very, very large family, and he had a twin brother named Dennis that he was incredibly close with. He was always very, very close to his family, but his brother Dennis in particular, obviously it's a twin bond, that's kind of a big deal. Now, he had grown up around ships, fishing boats, and shipyards his whole entire life, so it was only natural that he went on to work on a fishing boat named the Newfoundland Tradition right before his disappearance. And he'd only been with the crew at that point for about half a season. I am not very familiar with how long that technically is. I don't know a whole lot about fishing, but I do know he stayed on the boat a lot of the time. But when he wasn't on the boat, he shared an apartment with his brother. I'm pretty sure he stayed with his brother in this apartment in Clarenville, but I am not positive on that just because, again, there was a lot of lacking information. I know that's where he planned to go home to. But the week before he vanished, he had been on the boat for about 5 days straight. And obviously, that's a long time to be cooped up. When they pulled into St. John's Harbor on October 24th, all of the crew, including Danny, were very, very excited to take the night off and just go out because, again, St. John is a kind of fishing little town, and the particular area right beside the harbor is known for partying and drinking. All the fishermen go there, and they were pretty pumped. They plan to go to a few clubs. There is a small street named George Street in that area that's incredibly popular. It's known as the Main Strip. And then after that, Danny had plans to actually go back to the boat that night and stay on the boat one more night because he wasn't able to catch a bus back to Clarenville, so back home, until 1 p.m. on the 25th of October. So Danny was sticking to his plan. He hopped into a cab with the rest of the crew and headed off to George Street, where he was going to party for a little bit and then head back to the boat before heading home. The following day, however, his brother and family became very, very anxious because Danny never showed up at home when he was supposed to. Again, he was very close to his family. He always called them. He was in constant communication, at the very least, with his brother every day, if not every other day at like the absolute most. And everyone knew he had a bus at 1 p.m. from St. John to Clarenville, and he didn't show up on time. That was already odd. But again, being Danny, if he had just simply missed his bus, or if he needed to go back out on the boat for some reason, or pretty much if anything happened, he would have called his family, and he didn't at all. So they knew no contact from Danny equaled something is very, very wrong. So they decided to go ahead and report him a missing person. Authorities decided the best way to try to figure out what exactly happened to Danny and where he was to try to piece together the events of the night before. They were hoping they could pin down exactly what he did and where he might have ended up, and they kind of assumed he likely got drunk, or, you know, he was asleep somewhere or went off with a woman. So they kind of at first, I think, assumed it would be very easy to find him. So they found out that the crew had again all been together to go out to George Street, but as soon as they got there, Danny said that he instead wanted to go to a place called the Cotton Club, which was an adult club. And I have no idea if any of the other crew members went with him. I know that most of them were on George Street still, so he might have gone here by himself, but again, there seems to be no clarification on that. According to the crewmates, after being at Cotton Club for a little while, he then decided to go over to Turkey Joe's, where he met up with the rest of the crewmates and told them that his plans were to go back to the Cotton Club after being with them for a little bit. Now, according to information authorities found, and I'm unsure again if this is from CCTV or if this is what the crewmates said, but apparently Danny left Turkey Joe's at 11 p.m. that night. Now, he had told his friends he was planning on going back to the Cotton Club, but authorities said that after he left Turkey Joe's, they believe he was heading back to the boat. Now, again, I'm not sure why they're making that assumption. Not a lot of this information seems to be out to the public, but they claimed he was heading back to the boat at that point. However, this didn't seem to match up well with a call that Danny had made to his brother Dennis that night. So at about 10:45 p.m., Danny made a call to Dennis, and according to the time, again, you would assume he was at Turkey Joe's at this point, but the phone call was traced back to a place called Club 1, a place that no one had said he had gone that night, a place that authorities to this point had no idea he had gone to that night, and according to them, just 15 minutes later, he was leaving Turkey Joe's, so it just didn't make a lot of sense. But that wasn't the only thing strange about this phone call. Danny seemed very, very nervous throughout this entire phone call, and he never told his brother specifically why. He did say something eventually along the lines of someone was either making him paranoid or he was making someone paranoid, but again, it wasn't very clear which way, and Dennis didn't really remember which one he said. But Dennis knew the entire time that something wasn't quite right, because again, these are twins, and their entire life, if one of them got hurt, the other one felt it. There's a lot of crazy things that happen between twins, and it was one of those situations. He just knew Danny had something on his mind and something was going on. But he kind of forgot this when Danny all of a sudden changed his attitude. He asked Dennis if he wanted to go fish with him the next year. I'm assuming that means on the boat, the Newfoundland Traditions. But this was the only thing that kind of switched him out of this mode of being nervous and paranoid and upset. And the rest of the conversation was actually pretty positive because Dennis said he would absolutely love to do that. And this made Danny incredibly happy. So nothing else was really strange about the phone call. And Dennis really didn't think to pry anymore into what exactly Danny was so upset about earlier on. Now, by the end of this phone call, Danny told Dennis he would see him the following day, and he asked Dennis to tell their mom and dad that he loved them. Now, a lot of people, I will say, have kind of taken that bit of information and run with it when it comes to this case, but the family has specifically stated that they want it known that that was a very typical thing for him to ask his brother to do. It's not like a kind of goodbye sort of thing, which a lot of us could easily interpret it as that, but they have again said that's something very typical that he said all the time while he was on the phone, to just pass along a message to his parents that he loved them. So at this point, it went from, oh, maybe Danny went off with a girl, we can't find him, maybe he's drunk and hurt himself somewhere, to why on earth was Danny so nervous on the phone that night? And why was he at a club that no one was aware he was at 15 minutes before authorities had either been told or seen on possible CCTV footage that he was leaving a totally different club? Authorities spoke with the crew, and from what I have seen, I'm assuming they didn't offer up many answers. It's not very clear how many of them were with him that night. It's not even clear if someone in particular was with him the entire time. I have no idea if he went to the adult club by himself. I have no idea if he planned to walk back to the boat by himself. There just didn't seem to be a lot of information. But the one bit of information they were able to get to authorities was, again, something that seemed a bit odd. So that night, at some point, I'm unsure if it was on the boat beforehand, I am unsure if it was at Turkey Joe's, but Danny told his crewmates, at least two of them, that he planned to meet up later on with a woman. But he never said this woman's name, he never said where he met her, where he was planning to meet her, what they were planning to do, her description, nothing. So the only thing they knew is that Danny was meeting some mystery woman at some point in time that night, and that's about it. Danny's family questioned this idea though, because again, he was very, very close to his family. So if he was in a relationship with someone, he likely would have at least told his brother. He wasn't the kind of person to kind of meet up for like a one-night stand situation with a woman. Again, you kind of can't say you know everything about a person. There are a lot of things people will do that they just won't tell you. So I wouldn't automatically rule that out as a possibility, but they said it just wasn't in his character. And also, if he had done that, it was kind of suggesting that it's possible that he would have run off with her. But again, that just wasn't in his character. It's not something that he would have done. Authorities at this point had nothing to go off of and nothing to really tell the public. So the most they could do was reach out to the public and say, look, he was planning on meeting a woman that night. If you are that woman, please come forward. But this woman was never identified. No woman ever came forward claiming to, meet Danny that night. Absolutely nothing. So to this day, this woman still remains a mystery. Another bit of information that the crew members were able to come forward with, I think shortly after Danny was reported missing, was from the first mate. The first mate ended up contacting authorities saying that he was on the boat and he found two items of Danny's that he didn't believe would have been on the boat before Danny left. His wallet was still on the boat, and so was his watch. Obviously, you can probably understand why this is confusing. Danny, according to his family and according to most people's typical behavior, never left anywhere without his wallet and his watch. Now, authorities looked deeper into this because they're thinking, okay, he left his wallet on the boat. Well, how did he go and pay for things that night? What's going on with this? Maybe we can find a clue as to if he actually made it back to the boat or not. And they found out that he'd withdrawn about $200 earlier on in the night and then another $40 later on. So I, again, have the first question of, okay, so he withdrew money from the bank, so that means he only brought his debit card with him and his ID with him when going downtown, and then he withdrew cash, a decent amount of cash, and if he was going to a adult entertainment club, he likely had a lot of that in ones or fives, so he had a lot of bills on him, and he didn't bring his wallet. Something about that just doesn't sit right at all. It just didn't make a lot of sense. If you're planning on carrying a bunch of bills and your ID and your card and you're going to be drinking, you're going to bring your wallet to keep all of that contained in one place. But Somehow, this wallet ended up back on the boat, but authorities have never said if any of his bank cards were left in his wallet, especially the bank cards that were used that night. They haven't said if his ID was in this wallet, so maybe he really did just make things more complicated on himself and he wanted to carry all these things loose in his pockets. We can't really say, but it is definitely a little bit odd that these things were left behind. And to the family, it was a possible indication that Danny had, in fact, made it back to the boat, maybe started taking off his personal items, and the second they get home, start emptying out their pockets. I know my husband does it. He barely makes it inside of the house before he pulls all like 60 items out of his pocket. So that definitely seems like a possibility. So now they were trying to consider the idea that Danny maybe made it back to the boat, maybe started taking things out, and then for some reason went out and something happened. Authorities tried to search everywhere for any sign of Danny. They looked through alleyways, they were asking people around downtown, but nobody seemed to remember Danny or know pretty much anything at all. They asked all the homeowners in downtown St. John's to check all of their properties, their backyards, to check any sheds that they had because they wondered if maybe he was very intoxicated and maybe he went the wrong direction back to the boat, or maybe he couldn't make it all the way home. So he decided to find the first shelter he could and go to sleep. And at that point, it's maybe likely that he had too much exposure to the elements and ended up succumbing to them. But unfortunately, no one was able to find anything. They brought in police dogs, they brought in horses to search more area, but again, they just came across nothing. Now, a week after Danny had disappeared and after a week full of no answers, they finally decided to check around where the boat had been docked. They started to wonder if maybe he came back to the boat that night. He was highly intoxicated and slipped. He might have hit his head or passed out, and in turn, it's very likely he would have drowned. And unfortunately, the waters were so incredibly cold and the boat was docked by the Narrows. It would have been very, very easy for him to have been pulled very deep under. The cold temperatures of the water would not have let his body rise quickly at all, and he easily could have been pulled out to sea without anybody noticing. But when they went to check this area, it had already been a week, and if he had in fact somehow fallen in, the currents in the area in that particular location were incredibly rough. That is literally where the water from the harbor was being pulled out to sea. So if he had in fact fallen in, it had pretty much been too long and he would have no longer been there. Any sign that he'd fallen in would no longer be there. So the family was incredibly disappointed because they were looking way too late for any possible chance of a sign of Danny. And on top of that, they just weren't impressed with this idea in general because Danny had been around boats his entire life. He had been around shipyards his entire life. He was very familiar with navigating a boat. He was very familiar with safety. It was not the first time he would have gone back to a boat intoxicated before. While accidents do happen, to them it just wasn't very likely that he simply fell in and that's it. And the walk from the clubs to the boat as well, for the most part, was decently far away from the water depending on the route that you took. If you were walking on the sidewalk most of the way back, I would say probably about 85% of the walk would be far enough away from water to the point where you would have to really go off track to accidentally stumble into the water. There are a lot of shipping containers, there are a lot of gated off places. Granted, it could have looked very different in 2006, but from my walk that I took on Google Maps, it would have had to have been like perfect timing for him to have slipped off anywhere other than on the boat. All of the small clues seemed to be leading them absolutely nowhere, and it took another full week, so 2 full weeks, for authorities to even go and question anybody at the clubs that Danny was at that night. And again, it's too late 2 weeks after. Nobody's going to remember Danny. None of these people would have remembered speaking to him or maybe, if he said anything about plans or who he might have left with. So his family was yet again just disappointed. They decided to then go off of the behavior that he had on the phone call with his brother, and they tried to look to see if maybe there had been any altercations that night. Maybe if he was paranoid, he made someone else paranoid, or someone was making him paranoid. Maybe too much drinking had happened. Maybe he had pissed somebody off. Maybe someone was threatening him. Maybe he threatened someone. But when they looked into this, they almost instantly were able to rule it out that he had not been in any sort of altercation with anyone in downtown St. John's that night. Danny had left all of his personal items on the boat, so that information didn't suggest he had ran off at all. And while it was possible there was an accident that happened, the odd phone call kind of threw that idea into question. So the family finally went to go and pick up all of Danny's items, and they were particularly excited to see this wallet and his watch because it was so odd to them that these two things had been left behind. Except when they got to the police station to pick these items up, the police only had the wallet. And when they asked where the watch was, authorities said by the time they got to the boat to pick up these two items that the first mate said were there, the watch was somehow gone, and no one seemed to have an explanation as to where exactly it went. And this is when Danny's family really started to believe there was some sort of foul play going on, or at least things weren't as simple as they seemed. Months passed and no new information came in, and the family really had nothing to go off of other than these very few facts that they had. And while they did suspect something was wrong, none of this really proved any of that. But then in April 2007, a local psychic, Shelley Stokes, came forward claiming to have information that was very fruitful for the case. She ended up leading authorities to Campbell's Ship Supplies on Water Street, and they ended up finding Danny's jacket and hat that he had been wearing the night that he went missing. It was behind the ship supply. Danny's family thought this was great. This was finally their first big break. This was possible evidence, but authorities didn't exactly see it that way, because there was to them no visible evidence of foul play. There was no blood, no tearing out of the norm of working on a boat. They said that they would not test this jacket for DNA. So to this day, since 2006, it is still sitting in an evidence box. And I don't know about you guys, but seems like a lot of time for DNA evidence to just simply deteriorate. To this day, no body has turned up, nobody claims to have seen anything, and somehow the watch is still missing, and the crew that was in charge of watching that watch until authorities got there have no answers for that. Now, authorities say there is nothing that indicates foul play, but plenty of people have their own theories. So that's what I'm going to be jumping into now. So George Street is a very rough street, as I said, and an exact quote from someone that lives there is, "It keeps the police busy." So if that gives you kind of an idea of what it's like, plus fishermen, there you go. The downtown area itself is only a couple of blocks. It's, I think, like 2 or 3 streets over. It's very, very small. And it's known for brawls and drinking, and it's pretty much busy any night of the week. These fishermen, when they come into the harbor, don't have much else to do. There is a decent-sized homeless population, but because of this nature of the area, authorities are normally roaming about. So there are people that believe it's possible he got into an altercation with someone downtown and something happened. Maybe this person, took things too far and then disposed of him. But in that case, and with how busy the area is, I just feel like there's not a huge possibility or chance that someone didn't see something, that authorities didn't hear things. When you are prepared for constant brawls and you're constantly having to deal with them, it just doesn't seem likely that one that possibly ended in a fatality seemed to be missed. Now, there are also people that believe that this mystery woman has something to do with his disappearance. He had never mentioned a woman to anyone in his family, even his brother. He didn't say any details to the crewmates about this woman. So some people believe it's possible that he met her at the Cotton Club. Now, since authorities haven't released if his crewmate said he spoke about this woman before going out or after, it's kind of hard to make that assumption, but I guess it's a possibility, and a lot of people kind of have theories within this theory. Because there's such little information in this case, people really have run wild with ideas. But a lot of people believe maybe he met up with this woman at the adult club. Maybe it's possible that she had a pimp and it was kind of like a situation where this pimp got angry. Some people believe that somehow Danny was set up. But I just don't see what the motive would be in this situation. He seemed like a pretty calm guy. Again, I don't know him personally, and unfortunately there's not a lot to speak for his character other than a few things his family has said. So maybe there's just some things we don't know, but from what I've seen, I'm just not seeing that idea as making a lot of sense. To me, it just seems like that's kind of a bit of a stretch. So the other theory is the most obvious one and seemingly the most accepted one by people on Reddit threads, by people that I have just talked to about it. Danny had been drinking. He made his way back to the boat, and between authorities and most of the people online that have looked into this case and people that have spoken about it other than his family, everyone just believes that for some reason or another, he ended up accidentally falling into the water. And I 100% get that. It happens actually a lot more than you guys would think. There is this common thing that you guys know about when it comes to the smiley face killer. People believe there is a serial killer out there that is tossing these young men into bodies of water. And while I guess that's possible, it has not been proven or disproven. A lot of the times it's just common for intoxicated individuals near bodies of water to slip up, not be paying attention, and fallen. It's just something that ends up happening. Now, I can absolutely see where this theory is coming from, but it just leads me personally to a very huge question that I don't understand why I'm not seeing other people question this. If he was simply walking back to the boat and accidentally slipped being intoxicated into the water, either on the boat or on his way back, how the heck did his jacket and hat get behind a ship supply? I've already put up a picture of the ship supply, but I'm going to show you again on the maps. If you look at this ship supply is on his way back to the boat. He would have gone this way to get to and from downtown. Hello from Danielle in the future, but I actually noticed something while I was looking on Google Maps to edit. As you can see, the ship supply is kind of floating out in the middle of the street, so I'm not sure if it's one of these two buildings or maybe it's over here. But authorities basically said he would have had to have walked by this to explain why his clothes were there. And he would have had to cross the Waterford River over this bridge and then kind of hang back up to the other side of the harbor. But what I noticed is that there's actually another way. Now, I don't know if this existed in 2006, but I know that as of right now, there is a river walk right up here that you can clearly see. He could have pretty much not gone nearly as far. He could have cut over. There's actually a really pretty bridge. Again, it's a nice river walk. He could have crossed there. I'm unsure if there would have been a way to go from one path to another right here, or if maybe he would have had to have walked all the way down the river walk to get back. But either way, this kind of throws question into the idea that he might have had to have walked past the ship supply. And since that was such a big thing for authorities that he had to have walked by there, I just found it interesting to add into here because it definitely made me wonder if the clothes might have actually ended up there a different way. He might not have actually passed this area. Now, the issue is that, first of all, the ship supply, there's no reason he would have been walking around it, really. He would have had to stay on the sidewalk and crossed over this bridge in order to get to the other side of the harbor to get back to the boat. All there is a very narrow river. Pretty sure it's called Waterford River. This river does empty out into the harbor, but there's no reason why his clothes would have ended up all the way over here behind the shipyard and then he walk all the way to the water and then somehow fall in. To me, it's just kind of like way too stretched for me to believe that's a possibility. And I understand that it's probably the most logical answer that he fell in the water, but to me, there's just not enough people questioning why his jacket and hat would have ended up off first. I just think that right there almost probably holds all the answers to this case. When it comes to this hat and jacket being off, I searched back to 2006. October 24th, 2006, I searched to the exact time he likely was walking. It was 30-something degrees. He would not have taken off the jacket. And not only was it 30 degrees, but I've also seen that it was raining that night. There's just no way he would have willingly taken that jacket off. I do know when you've been drinking, you do get a little bit more warm and the cold doesn't bother you as much. But again, I just don't see why he would take it off, let alone leave it somewhere behind. So this leads me to an idea that he did fall in the water, but it wasn't his own accident. Like I said, most of downtown is heavily populated and has a heavy police presence at night. Now, if you look at where the ship supply is, this is an area where there's probably not a lot of people. This would be a great area for homeless population to kind of hide out for the night. If someone had any bad intentions or wanted to rob someone, maybe, you know, a great target like an intoxicated person walking back home, this would kind of be a good place to hide and do it. And it's very possible to me that maybe he walked by the wrong person and this person then went on to try to rob him or start some altercation. And what's the first thing that's going to fly off when you're in an altercation like that? Probably your hat. I mean, it's possible that his jacket could have come off too, but that would take a little bit more effort. And I feel like if clothes are being pulled off, there would have been some sign on the jacket that there was some sort of struggle, and there wasn't. So while this idea could potentially fit, it just doesn't fully fit. But the other thing that bothers me about this idea is that the river was not very far from the back of this ship supply. If someone took things a little too far, maybe stabbed him or did something, it would be very easy to drag him over to the river, throw him in, and he would pretty quickly float downstream and end up in the ocean, likely to never be found again because the cold water would keep him under. Then there is a theory that possibly someone on the boat had something to do with his disappearance. This one's an interesting theory to me, and I have thought of something that I haven't seen anyone else mention so far online, and this is kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this forward. The owner of the boat said he got along great with everyone, he did a lot of good work, but when you are in a confined situation with people for an extended period of time, it's very possible to get tired of one another. Maybe there was something about him that the crew didn't like. Maybe he had an issue with one person. Obviously, no one has come forward and said this is a thing. No one has admitted that this was a problem, but I think it's a massive possibility. Now, the first thing that kind of alerted me to the crew being a little bit sketchy was the fact that they found the wallet and the watch, but they managed to misplace the watch. And I feel like there's probably a reason why. So what if Danny did in fact make it back to the boat that night? Let's say he got back and he started, you know, getting ready to settle in for the night. What are the first things he's probably going to take off? He's probably going to take off his hat, and then he's probably going to take off his jacket. He's probably going to pull his wallet out. He's probably going to take his watch off. And then what if someone showed up on the boat? What if someone had followed him back, you know, showed up at the boat and possibly did something to him? At this point, it would be very easy, being in the Narrows, to just push him over. It would possibly leave no evidence depending on how you did it. They would know the water's freezing cold, and with the area they were in, he would wash out to sea and nobody would ever know what happened. It would be easy to create a story like he's going to go meet up with a random female that no one knows anything about. At this point, you wouldn't want anyone to know that he made it back to the boat, because then that would make you look guilty if you were someone that resided on the boat. So what are you going to do? You're probably going to freak out, take the hat and jacket and throw it somewhere random to make it look like there was some sort of accident. Authorities had searched a lot of space. At this point, I don't know if there was any snow on the ground, but I do know it wasn't snowing in the days surrounding his disappearance. So the fact that they so obviously missed a jacket and a hat that would have been in an area they would have checked on his walk to and from downtown. I just feel like it's possible it was placed there maybe afterwards. On the other hand, a wallet and a watch are smaller items, and maybe whoever is responsible for this, if this is something that happened, didn't notice that the wallet and the watch had been left behind after the fact. So they decided at this point they were kind of screwed. They had to tell authorities that these items were still on the boat. But then what if they noticed after telling authorities this, that the watch had some sort of physical evidence of a struggle maybe? What if the watch somehow got cracked? Or what if there was some sort of physical evidence on the watch and they freaked out, so they knew that was something they couldn't hand over? Now, I know that all that kind of sounds like a stretch, but there's just something not right with the watch being gone and the clothes being found behind the ship supply. I just feel like there's something very, very wrong with that. I do not think that Danny would have simply placed his clothes, taken clothes off and placed them behind a ship supply and then also somehow managed to vanish after that. People need to realize that when you have such little information to go off of, you are going to run with the information you have like crazy. And the watch being gone, I'm sure, has kept this family up countless numbers of nights since he went missing, trying to figure out why it's gone. Just think about it this way. If you call in to say that you are holding important items of value to possibly Danny or a family, someone that is literally missing, you are going to not somehow mistakenly misplace that item. It just screams funky to me. You know, it could be any of these theories. Unfortunately, there is such a massive chance that somehow he did fall into the water. For some reason, he did take his jacket off. For some reason, he did leave his items behind on the boat and he just fell in. But the scariest part about that is that based on where he was, the chances that his body will ever be found and this family will ever get to lay him to rest, out of all the cases that I've covered, that's not really something I've stumbled across before. That, you know, usually this is something happening on land. Normally it's like a lake, it's somewhere where something can possibly turn up. But looking on a map and just seeing where he might have fallen in and the big, gigantic ocean that he could have pulled into is just a feeling that I feel like I've never really had to feel and think about before. So I think that's why this case keeps drawing me back to it. His family's taken it incredibly hard, especially his twin brother. After losing a sibling myself, I get it 100%. It is not something that you ever snap out of or forget or really get past. You just kind of roll with it and struggle with it every single day. I don't know, to me it just seems odd. I know there's a lot of people that have questioned the psychic. I personally am not someone that's very convinced by psychics, but at the same time, you know, my husband's father was a police officer. He was on the SWAT team, and one time him and his team were led to 2 bodies by a psychic in the middle of a field, tied to a tree, you know, something absolutely insane in the middle of nowhere. Like, nobody would have known where this was, and this psychic managed to lead them straight to it. I just am very hesitant and nervous to believe psychics. I do find it odd that she was able to lead them straight to this, and then directly afterwards she refused to help anymore because she said, and I quote, "for reasons of personal nature." A lot of people believed she was maybe paid off to lead them to this, so maybe they would stop looking and maybe hope he had, like, you know, had an accident. A lot of people believe she does know something, but there's just no telling. A lot of people also believe that the $40 taken out was for a cab back to the boat. It was an hour walk. It was about a 20-minute drive. I know that a cab probably would not cost $40 for a 20-minute drive. I don't know, though honestly, I don't normally take cabs anywhere. But some people believe he took that money out and he did make it back to the boat. And again, something happened there because, again, why would he want to walk an hour back to the boat late at night in the freezing cold? And in that case, that would really rule out the fact that he walked past the ship supply and took his jacket off. But again, no one's ever come forward, no cab driver, no anyone claiming they drove him back to the boat that night. It's just a mess, and authorities seem to really be set on the idea that nothing happened and they don't want to investigate it any further. I think it's also unfortunate that the authorities won't DNA test the jacket and the hat. I have never before heard anyone say that they had to 100% suspect foul play to DNA test something. You would assume you'd want to physically link those items to the person you're, assuming is missing. But for some reason, again, they just won't do it. And unfortunately, time deteriorates the crap out of DNA. And if they wait much longer, there's probably going to be nothing left to test. I want you guys to let me know down below your theories. I know that you guys think from every possible angle. And while this may seem like a very cut and dry case, and there's going to be a lot of people that say the easiest answer is usually your absolute answer, but I'm just not satisfied with that. I don't think it's ever worth dismissing something, especially when a body's never been found and a case has never been closed. It's just stupid to not think of every possible option. If you're from the area and you want to add any specific details about the location, feel free to. Again, it's very, very hard for me to understand an area and the possibilities of scenarios only being able to walk it through Google Maps. So it's always very